Chris John for KaijuPod.com, and welcome back to our series of monthly retrospectives as we look at September 1994. And the one game that leaps out as being important to gaming in the future from September 1994 is System Shock, which came out this month on PCs. The product of Looking Glass Studios, the then new Looking Glass Studios, and headed up by Warren Spector. It kind of took Spector's work on games like Ultima for Origin and things like that, these first-person RPGs with, which were very technically accomplished, and then put them into a cyberpunk setting. The basic idea here, as we're watching somebody else play, for full disclosure, is you've got to roam around a very cyberpunky space station and sort of deal with Shodan, which is an evil AI type that's constantly screwing with you. And you kind of have to flip between this space station and going into cyberspace, because being in cyberspace was so hip at the time. We're looking at the sort of Lawnmower Man era, as well as the forthcoming looming on the horizon Rise of the Robots. We look forward to doing that later on this year. But System Shock a good deal better than Rise of the Robots. An incredibly detailed, just first-person RPG, really remarkable for the time. The 3D environments that were on display were incredibly remarkable for the time. Bear in mind that Doom was the sort of height of first-person technology here, and here you had 3D spaces that you could look up, look down in, walk around in. And kind of, although lots of games had done that before, here we had a proper polygonal 3D that actually looked kind of like it was supposed to look, whereas a lot of earlier 3D games would be very abstracted. And it was as awkward as perhaps it would be to play right now. It was really praised at the time, and justly so, and it kind of highlighted Looking Glass's ability to produce things with a huge amount of atmosphere. And then System Shock 2 later on in the 1990s was, almost had a very real sense of horror to it. And then, of course, from there, sort of indirect successors to System Shock would exist in the Bioshock games as well, and that was a whole nother can of worms. But yeah, in the meantime, September 1994, a really important month, System Shock being a really important game to gaming history, even though it never really sold that well, despite the fact that it was praised across the board. It didn't do that great. It sold just shy of 200,000 units during its life. It was the seeds of something that wouldn't get big until the mid-2000s. There was one more game that would have significant impact on video games over the coming years. That came out in September 94, so let's look at that next. Arguably as important from September 1994 was Theme Park. Although it's kind of hard to say whether this did actually come out in September 1994, as digging around the internet makes it hard to find a precise date, although I do know that the Amiga version came out in September 94, so the PC version may have been a little bit earlier, but it's the Amiga version we're looking at here, hence the slightly dumbed down graphics in the 16-bit version of the game. It was a game about creating a theme park, and was kind of, this was a game from Bullfrog, so Peter Molyneux's studio, and they would go on to give us Theme Hospital as well, and that was the direct follow-up to Theme Park. But Theme Park would go on, there was kind of all sorts of reduxes of the game. Theme Park World came out on PC as well as PlayStation 2, I believe, and really I think the remnants of Theme Park now are probably better found in the Roller Coaster Tycoon games, although both Theme Park and Roller Coaster Tycoon have gone down the dark path of free-to-play iOS stuff, and just kind of broke both of them. It broke both of those games, which is a shame, because Theme Park was the idea of creating your own theme park in your own space, and you've got these other people that you have to compete with in order to beat them in terms of being the most profitable theme park in the world. So there's all sorts of exploitation going on, you know, exploiting your workers, minimizing wait times for people, keeping your theme park clean, keeping your bouncy castle operational. Of course, you know, the deal is you want to build up enough money so you have crazy roller coasters going on, and then you have a really sort of crazy happy theme park, and then a really sort of crazy breaky downy theme park that endangered people's lives and whatnot. And it was just an awful lot of fun. And once you got further into it, it was all about managing the little things. It was all about watering down the soda with ice, and then upping the sugar count in the ice cream so that people were more energized to go on rides. And then they wanted to get snacks, so you increase the salt in the popcorn so that then they want more drinks, which are watered down, and then you exploit. And that was what was great about theme park. Ironically enough, EA and then later Frontier Developments for Roller Coaster Tycoon would take that exploit mantra and then apply it to their consumers. So that was a shame. But still, theme park in September 94 was great fun stuff. There were a couple of big sequels in September 94. First of them, Mortal Kombat 2, which had already been in arcades for a little while, but was now just ported to home consoles, Super Nintendo and the Mega Drive, Genesis, and what have you. Very much the Western versions of the game we're looking at here. In Japan, you had green blood, and also I think the fatalities had to be in black and white, I believe. It's a weird kind of change they made. Also all sorts of changes they made for the German, you know, and other parts of the European market as well, switching things around. But the Super Nintendo version here did have the violence that you were expecting, the brouhaha over the first Mortal Kombat game kind of subsiding at this point, and Nintendo sort of allowing the slight violence of blowing someone up in a cartoon manner on their systems. This would actually be ported all around the place fairly obviously. The Game Gear version also came out in September this year in 1994. There'd be a Game Boy version later on, a 32X version later on, and the Amiga version came soon. PC came in the following year. There was a version on the Master System, and then later on throughout into 96 there were versions on the Saturn and the PlayStation as well. So a really big difference. What we're looking at here is little splices of the Super Nintendo version and the Mega Drive version. Can you spot the difference between the two? I can't. I don't care really. So yeah, there was a plot, but it's a fighting game plot, so it's pretty silly and dumb. But there were the usual sort of additions to the characters, changes to
Finisher.
Little tweaks. The main big tweaks were the introductions of the additions to the fatalities formula. So you could also turn someone into a baby with fatalities, and you could also give someone this friendship if you were willing to remember the extra.
Fight!
So this was kind of very serious to some so a lot of little tweaks.
Fight!
Fans were very pleased.
Finish him.
So on to another sequel of sorts for September 1994. This is Super Stardust. It's not really a sequel, it's actually kind of more of a special edition, as Stardust had actually been released back in January of 1994. December 93, somewhere around that time. and for the Amiga 500, the sort of basic 16-bit systems, and this was a remix of that for the Amiga 1200, a sort of, well, a reimagining, a very prettified reimagining of Asteroids, as you can see. It kind of basically involved, well, shooting some swirling rocks, and there was, you know, some very, very pretty graphics for the time, but it was a flashy, souped-up version of Asteroids, sort of 3 phases of each round, and then you fought a boss which had some very fancy rotating and scaling effects, and then there were these tunnel sequences which were really sort of hailed as being technically amazing at the time. For what it squeezed out of, especially the Amiga 500 back earlier in the year, it was very visually spectacular. Perhaps the A1200 version, it kind of got hit a little bit, it dinged a little bit in reviews for not really adding much to what Stardust was, and Stardust was very highly praised, and justly so, for being a great reimagining of the Asteroids formula. But also for being, it did have a super story though, where, believe it or not, it was all about a mad scientist that was going to take over the world through his agents that were disguised as asteroids. So there was a lot that perhaps there's the sense of humor, the tunnel sequences and the thrust sequences that were all taken out of Super Stardust HD. So Stardust would disappear from 1994 until sometime around 2007, I guess, where Super Stardust HD appeared on PlayStation 3. From the same people. I mean, this was the product of a one-man studio called Bloodhouse, and that was half of the one of the 2 Finnish teams that would go on to form House Mark in the late 1990s. And House Mark would go on to produce Super Stardust HD, as well as Resogun on PS4, and Dead Nation and the new Alien Nation, which I'm not a fan of, but I tend to keep Stardust fresher in the mind. But yeah, Super Stardust is still a really great reimagining of Asteroids, but perhaps not quite as good as the original Amiga 500 version. Another new IP for September 1994 then, but perhaps one that didn't fare quite as well in the future, Ruff and Tumble, which came out on the Amiga this month. The product of a studio called Wunderkind, I presume a German studio, that did Ruff and Tumble and absolutely nothing else, it seems. They disappeared without a trace, and everything I found online said they were established in 1994 and disappeared in 1994, which is a bit of a shame, because Wunderkind's a good, fun game, and the Amiga was kind of wanting for a good sort of Contra-style run-and-gun game, and this was a Contra-style run-and-gun game that's actually pretty cool and quite pretty as well, despite the fact that it doesn't really play well with emulation. So if you kind of see some artifacting and stuff that doesn't look very pretty here in this video, then that's why. It's also why I'm going to blame my terrible gameplay on. It's the game's fault, the artifacting and stuff. I can concentrate, I guess. The idea in Ruff and Tumble is you're controlling this little guy that's running around. It's called Ruffkins or something like that. It's some pun Ruff, I guess. He's tumbling all over the place. And you just got to run around and shoot all the things. You get to the exit, but the exit's sort of locked off at the start of the level. You have to kill a certain percentage of the enemies on the level in order to open up the exit. So it's all about murderous rampaging. You can run, you can jump, you can shoot all over the place. They've sort of got around the fact that most people play Amiga games on single button joysticks, idiotically, God knows why we ever did that. They got around that by having a kind of an alternate mode, so if you hold down the fire button, then you can whirl around the joystick and shoot in all directions, which was how they got around that. So it's kind of sort of Resident Evil style in a way, I guess. You can either run or you can aim, but you can't do both at once. One clever thing is that you had ammunition, but it was it was sort of recharging ammunition, so it was almost like your gun overheating in a way. You can have all sorts of different types of weapons that were sort of limited use, but your sort of default machine gun would constantly drain down. When it was out of bullets, you would just fire really, really slowly, and then you could stop for a little bit if you found a breather, and then start charging in again. And yeah, it was a really nice, sort of fun, cheery, pretty looking game. It scrolls very smoothly, it looks very nice, and you know, perhaps a little bit irritating when you get when you run up across these, you know, these things that spawn enemies, and you run over it every time just as it spawns a new beastie, but when you kill enough of the creatures that come out of it, they get deactivated. And yeah, good fun game. It, you know, very pretty, lots of explosions, things like that. Squeezed a lot out of the Amiga at the time, and it was a pretty good thing. It's just that, you know, completely forgotten, and the people that made it, it seems completely forgotten, sadly. But that's Ruff and Tumble. Let's move on. Finally rounding us out for September 1994, a little bit of a bizarre one, Humans the Firemen, which came to Japanese Super Famicoms in September. Yeah, a little bit of a weird one, just because there weren't that many games about fighting fires, and then suddenly the Firemen came out, and then the next month from Jalico was the Firefighters, which became known in the West as the Ignition Factor. But this, despite being localized fully in English, this is the Japanese version of the game, but it's in English. Civilization has progressed little in the last 20 years, between 1990 and 2010. Yeah, that sounds about right. Christmas party, blah blah blah. It's Die Hard, but with fires. This one was kind of different to, I think Firemen and Firefighters were both very different. Firefighters was kind of very po-faced, and Fireman is kind of more self-consciously ridiculous. This was brought to us by Human, who were kind of famous for PC Engine stuff, and also most notably the Fire Pro Wrestling series. You have to get through this dialogue at the beginning here, and they won't shut up. And here we go. So basically, you've got to fight fires. You can get down on the ground to protect yourself from smoke, but you know, really your main sort of method of fighting these fires, you've got a sort of water grenade thing that takes out stuff, but you've only got a few of those, and I just accidentally pushed it there. But you can also shoot straight out in an arc and aim that stuff, as well as shoot down at the floor to put fires out. And there's all kinds of kind of ridiculous ways that they've kind of had some fun with the idea of fighting fires in a game. You know, I'm not sure how far we'll get later on, but there's all kinds of different fires, like chemical flames that require different fire extinguishers, and just bizarre kind of excuses for boss fights, given that you're fighting fires in a video game. It's just really bizarre. Since I don't believe this was a two-player game, but you do have a companion with you at all times. Here's the guy that's throwing those water grenades. He's also sort of helps out in different parts of the game by beating on fires with his fire blanket. And yeah, you've got to go through. It's kind of looks very cartoonish and fun, despite having, you know, kind of a bit more serious approach to the actual story or the things that are going on. So you go through the river here. One thing that this shared with the Firefighters was tight time limits on the level. So you see I've only got 10 minutes to do this entire first stage in. Firefighters was even more obtuse, you know, was even more irritating with that stuff because it just wasn't as clear where you're supposed to go. This is more arcadey, and it's like, hey, go this way. You want to go through the levels, and you've also got to have a look at the map. You know, there's an objective highlighted in red. Those are the rooms that I want to get to really. But you also want to have a look at the life indicator that's spiking there, because that's saying we're near a survivor. So if I head up this escalator here, I can find this dude. And hooray, I've managed to find him. So you want to grab and help out as many people as you can. Might still be some people in the meeting room. There will be people in the meeting room. Hurry up. Go on then. Chop chop. There might still be people in there. Damn it. Okay. So he's, Danny here is going to leave me on my own to fend for myself while he helps out that dude. And then he'll pop back later on. There you go. That's good here, Danny. Yeah, and every time you do rescue someone, you get a little bit of health back, so that's nice as well. So I'm going to go down here. And yeah, this is what I mean by having some kind of ridiculous, not boss fight, but kind of approaches to having different enemies. Is the security robots, I guess, the control robots have also caught fire and gone bananas. So there's that kind of aspect to worry about. And you get attacked by, ooh, it takes off a fair bit of life there and does that thing that lots of Super Famicom games do, where the vision goes skew-whiff to indicate you're taking damage. I'm sure that fire didn't hit me. So yeah, this is a lot of fun. It's a lot better than Firefighters, which we might have a look at next month, which was just kind of... That game was kind of, it sounds ridiculous, but more of a simulation firefighting game, where it was a similar thing, but it would give you a list of objectives at the beginning and you had to remember them all, and then it would have really, really irritating people in it. Like you would rescue someone from the fire and they would say, well, I'll only leave this burning building if you find my medicine first, and then you'd have to do that. It was like dealing with the Iron Sheik or something. It was just, yeah, it was just really bad. But Firemen was infinitely superior, just because it was a little bit more, I don't know, had a little bit more of its tongue in its cheek here as we go down to the basement. And, oh, can you go ahead? Do we? Oh, there we go, lovely. Yes, I believe I'm heading towards a boss encounter here, but I might run out of life before I do so, because I've been very, very clumsy in walking into fires. There's a little bit of tutorial stuff here. Let's go under this pipe, under the flames that are going to lick at me. Underneath, there we go, and then you need to use that one. Let's go under here as well. Oh, let's go under there at all. It's surprising there's not many. There's really not many firefighting games about. Certainly not recently. I'm sure there's probably firefighting simulator, because there's everything simulator these days. But you know, I can't think of many others. Like, certainly not in the mainstream space. I remember Konami in the early days of the PS2 put out a game called Firefighter FD18, which was kind of a survival horror game, but about a firefighter. And it was, yeah, here's a boss fire. That's funny. It's funny until I died. It didn't kill me up. Kill me then though. So, I love that guy. He's so distraught. He's just pounding him. No! Like the guy from Firefighter FD18 then, that his deal was that his dad had been killed in a fire, and so he was a firefighter out of revenge. You know, he wanted to take revenge against the fires, and it was incredibly melodramatic, absolutely hilarious game that. But not as good as this, The Firemen in September 1994. A good place to end it here. So for more on the hot new releases of September 1994, 1984 and 2004, check out the full written retrospective on kaijupop.com. I've won! And I did it for me. Fire rate 87%, and I did nothing towards the end there. It's just about to die again. Check out the full written retrospective on kaijupop.com. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Bye bye.